Welcome everyone to this LinkedIn live stream. I'm Aaron Kelly, president of Inovalon, and I'm here joined by two of my great partners at AWS, Matt Carr and Todd Sharp. And we're going to talk about data and the future of healthcare, how it runs on data. And our question for you in the audience is, are you ready? So AI, data, and analytics and cloud technologies are and have been transforming healthcare for some time. And healthcare organizations can move beyond reactive decision-making to proactive, insight-driven strategies that can really impact the care continuum across that journey. Now, Inovalon has been on this journey for some time as we've transformed into a pure-play SaaS company with the largest primary data source in the market. And that's part of our what we call our More Squared registry, which exceeds 398 million unique patients, 87 billion medical events, over 1 million physician data points, and we're connected to almost 700,000 clinical settings. So we continue to grow that data set, and it continues to be a core part of our mission at Inovalon, which is around improving outcomes and economics. Now, our 5-year partnership with AWS has enabled us to scale, transform, and innovate more quickly as an organization in helping our customers. And we've been powered by AWS for a while. We're using new capabilities to reach even more customers. And I'm really excited to be joined by AWS's leadership here to talk about the power of data in healthcare and how it's core to everything we do. And so let me start with some introductions. I'll start with Matt Carr. Matt is the managing director of U.S. Healthcare and Life Sciences at AWS. Matt, welcome to the live LinkedIn cast.
Aaron, thanks for having me. I'm so excited about this topic. I spend all of my time with various different companies, whether that is pharma companies, medical devices, payers, providers, health tech, and all of them are looking to drive better patient outcomes, better economics, as they say, no margin, no mission. But one of the things that is common is they're looking at science, they're looking at medical, they're looking at technology, but data is absolutely universally acknowledged as a huge, powerful tool to drive better patient outcomes and largely untapped right now. So this is going to be a great conversation.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. And Todd, let me welcome you. Todd Sharp, he's the head of strategy and transformation, an area principal in the areas of solution management around healthcare. So Todd, welcome.
Great to be with you again, Aaron. Thank you so much. You know, to me, working in the industry for a while in healthcare, I see that data is the lifeblood of modern healthcare because it enables evidence-based decisions, personalized care delivery, operational efficiency, and sustainable cost management, all the reasons that Matt suggested. You know, in an industry where margins for our providers particularly are thin, anywhere from 6% down to negative 1.5, stakes are high. You know, outcomes are important. This isn't just mission critical, we're life critical. And data, well, it transforms reactive care into proactive health management, allowing us to identify patterns before they become problems and move that promise of bench to bedside to data to bedside instead, to speed outcomes along for better improvements.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you both more. Data is so foundational to the healthcare landscape today. But let's dive into some of the different sectors of healthcare, say payers, providers, pharmaceutical companies, medical device companies. Matt, maybe I'll start with you. Yeah. What are you seeing in the area of say, payers and pharmaceutical companies on the importance of data to achieve their goals and improve outcomes for patients?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the payer space, and it's really about two things, operational efficiency and improvement. And so on the operational efficiency side, it's really about how they can drive claims adjudication better, leveraging multiple data sources, whether that is member information, whether that is EHR information, whether that is policy information, all of that coming together to give them the information to make the right decision and make the right decision quickly in the benefit of patients. The other thing is member experience. So a lot of our insurance companies get reimbursed through how well they service their members, us. And so they look at how they can drive improvement in member enrollment and onboarding, A lot of what I'm seeing is that point of interaction between the insurance company and us as patients is in that contact center. And so how they can leverage data to get a head start on the conversation and help us navigate the journey that we're often going through. And then also the providers. So we've all heard and seen that our providers are getting burned out. There's so much on our providers that they're having to sacrifice spending time with the patient. And so anything that anyone in the ecosystem, especially the payers, can do to reduce that burden and allow our providers and clinicians to spend more time doing what they can only do, which is help diagnose and drive treatment, is something that they're using data to do. On the pharma side, I'm seeing it a little bit different. Yeah, there's still efficiency, but primarily the biggest driver is speed. There is so much data that is out there, whether that is external data to these pharmaceutical companies or internal data and historical data, that can help them drive better clinical designs, improve research effectiveness, and really being able to do things like finding the right patient for a clinical trial that meets their inclusion and exclusion criteria so that they can cut down the amount of time that it takes to get a treatment, a pharmaceutical, a drug from concept all the way through to helping somebody, or in their case, generating revenue. Because as soon as they discover that, that patent clock starts ticking. So efficiency, improvement in experience, and then speed are some of the things that I'm seeing that all of these companies are using data for in various different ways.
Great, Matt. That's right. Todd, how about you? What are you seeing in, say, the area of providers or medical devices? What's going on there?
Yeah, I'd say in providers, one thing that really ties in, Matt was talking about cohorting, right, on the pharmaceutical side. And when you look into clinical research inside of provider space, those pharmacies that operate with those sponsored programs are looking at medication adherence tracking, inventory optimization, adverse event monitoring, and personalized medication management. The provider large outside of the pharmacy is looking at clinical decision support, patient flow optimization, and resource allocations. On the other side of the coin, we talked about revenue cycle a little earlier, and outside the four walls care has become a much more important thing over the last few years, much more focus on it, even by hospitals and providers. And medical devices are a big part of that. The data in medical devices drives predictive maintenance alerting, therapy personalization algorithms, clinical outcome tracking, and usage pattern analysis to make sure that there's adherence. All this data drives product improvement cycles and regulatory compliance documentation, which are essential for patient safety and proactive monitoring.
Yep. No, that all makes sense. We're seeing a lot of data as well and delivering gaps of care from that the payers are calculating and providing to the providers, which kind of leads me to my next question, which is using data within one of these healthcare organizations is really important for driving outcomes and economics. But how are customers today using data to connect the dots between these different segments in healthcare? What are you seeing customers do to kind of reach across the aisle using data to, again, with that focus on patient experience and outcomes? And Todd, maybe I'll start with you.
That's a great question, Eron. Thanks for asking it. Healthcare organizations are using these approaches to break down silos through integrated payer-provider data exchanges for seamless care management. There's an NIH study out there that demonstrates where payers and providers collaborate around data. The lifetime cost of medically complex patients can be brought down as much as 18% with improved outcomes and quality of life. So it's critical that we look for these cross-segment things. Pharmacy provider medication reconciliation platforms reduce adverse events. And you're looking at life sciences and provider partnerships that enable real-world evidence collection. Something that 5-10 years ago we wouldn't see nearly the prevalence of real-world evidence collection and use that we're able to see today through these collaborations across segments.
Yeah. Hey, Matt, how about you? What are you seeing when it comes to organizations within healthcare using data to connect the dots between their different silos?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because when I deal with customers, a lot of what they're doing is they have acknowledged the value in cross-data type analysis. And many of them are still trying to break down the silos within their own companies. But the acknowledgement of the value of bringing together disparate data sources to find sometimes they're obvious connections and it's just connecting the data. Sometimes they're non-obvious connections that are being able to be found when you bring different data sets together. I mean, I think you look at things like social determinants of health, things like access to transportation, and the impact that may have on a positive patient outcome or economic situation. All of those things are non-medical data, but being brought together as part of an overall view of the entire situation for a particular patient, and using that to understand not only just what should be done, but if it's being done correctly, if it's being done consistently, if it's being adhered to. And so all of those things are huge factors in what everyone sees is this interconnected healthcare ecosystem, whether it is pharmacies and providers, payers and providers, medical devices and clinicians, all of these things, the data is there. And I think people are starting to understand the impact it has. And so we're seeing a big push, as Todd mentioned, for things like real world data, real world evidence to really understand what's going on with health outcomes.
Yeah, Matt, I agree. We're seeing, you mentioned SDOH data. We're seeing an increased demand from our customers. I want to be able to link together SDOH data that really outlines some of the challenges or opportunities a patient may have with their ability to get access to care. So completely see that. So I did see a question from our audience, and so I'm going to jump on that. Jeff asks, how can cloud-based AI improve clinical workflows efficiently for providers? Which is a great tee up to where I wanted to go next, right? We can't really talk about healthcare data without talking about AI and machine learning. So let's really dive in. And why don't we start with just the fundamentals, and then we'll get to Jeff's question. So what are the key considerations that customers should be thinking about when it comes to using AI or ML with healthcare data? Maybe, Todd, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Matt.
Yeah, there are several key considerations for AI adoption. I mean, first one to me is data quality and security, right? Secure governance foundations. Make sure that you're applying ethical frameworks with clear oversight. We hear a lot about social determinants of health, but I think it's important in AI that we're also looking at democratization of the source data to make sure that we're adhering to social determinants of health. Now, clinical workflow integrations, not disruption. One of the biggest complaints from providers over the years of technology in my career is that don't give me another device, don't give me another system, don't give me another thing. But if we integrate AI with clinical workflows rather than disrupt AI, human in the loop becomes a natural extension for improved flows. Robust validation and regulatory alignment. I've made an argument, and many others have, there's nothing original about this, that despite us being life critical rather than mission critical, healthcare is probably the best place for us to look at these large language models and small models to where they could do the most benefit. And the reason is clinicians themselves have to recertify and continuously educate themselves on things that they've known about 20, 30, 40 years in their career. Diabetes changes, the way you treat it changes, and the protocols change. So every year they have to do continuing education, recertification. By applying that similar model into AI, we are assuring that AI is minimizing bias and hallucination because AI models themselves are actually practicing at their highest level of scope as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and so, just to follow up on Jeff's question around where AI is helping clinical workflow, within Inovalon, one of our products is our converged medical record review product, which we partner closely with AWS on. And in that case, we're using AI to make it much easier for clinicians to navigate a medical record to find key insights that they need. So rather than having to read what in some cases can be a 100-page document, we're using natural language processing and advanced analytics on top of that to understand things like what a medical record reviewer might be looking for in the context of HEDIS and quality measurement, or what might be looking for in the context of risk adjustment, highlighting those different sectors within that medical record, identifying what might be false positives, and only presenting the clinician with key elements that they can then go do a double click in. So vastly speeding up the process of medical record review, improving accuracy, and allowing them to deliver, again, better outcomes as well as economics. So that's one example, Jeff. Hey, Matt, let me go to you. As you think about the importance around the foundational of data within AI, Lily asks, what's the biggest misconception about AI's role in healthcare? What are you seeing that is, fact versus fiction or hype versus reality?
Well, I think when AI came out originally with generative AI kind of last year, it really hit the hype cycle. There was this belief that it was this magic button. And as we've been talking, as the whole conversation today is about, is AI is as good as the data that you feed into it. And so having that data foundation, that solid, secure, governed, cataloged, accessible data is critical to the ability for your generative AI to have guardrails. Without that data serving as the guardrails, we've all heard of hallucinations. And so those are some things that are critical in having that good data foundation that your generative AI or AI ML can sit on top of. I think one of the other things that we have to be careful of, and I'm seeing this with a lot of customers, is that balance. There is a massive amount of operational efficiency, workflow efficiency that we can leverage from good use of data and AI into those workflows. But as Todd mentioned, it has to be integrated. There's not this go to this separate process, this separate application to do the work. We have to figure out how to integrate it into the existing workflow. And how do we take in Amazon terminology, the non-differentiated heavy lifting off of the clinician and use technology to drive that for things like EHR summarization, ambient listening and transcription, nurse handoff notes. All of these things are driving burnout of our provider community. But if you look at the demand for providers, whether that's doctors, nurses, and the actual supply of that, there is a huge gap. And AI and ML and data and the use of data can really help bridge those gaps together and start to drive some of that closer. And so I think really being able to look at, I'll call it taking what the defense gives you. There's a lot of benefit that can be had for AI/ML in clinical settings. And I think there's a lot of companies that are using that and looking at that, and they're pursuing it carefully. But there's so much low-hanging fruit that really can allow the improvement in quality of care, because what it's doing is taking the non-differentiated heavy lifting off of those providers of care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Matt, that's great. And Ashley asked the question, Todd, that I'm going to pitch your way, which is, and Matt hit on this a little bit, but when you think about balancing the benefits of automation with human oversight when implementing AI and ML in healthcare, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I touched on a little bit earlier around using similar model structures as we've looked at for continuing education for providers themselves and those clinical modes. But I want to point one out that I think is really important in the life sciences and the medical device area, is that acceleration of medical devices and drug discovery. We have this thing called synthetic control arms in trials. The synthetic control arms use synthetic data techniques, and they have a specific application where you may not have to give, for example, in a drug trial, a placebo to anyone. You may not need to do an A/B testing in medical devices. You can actually use synthetic control arms with synthetic data to replace a control placebo group to actually advance care faster and more accurately. They simulate how a control group would respond based on historical trial data and real world evidence. How that relates back to this question is that even outside of the provider patient space, you're able to take these kinds of mechanisms and IoT experiences and allow remote technicians to monitor what those interactions are in near real time to provide that real world evidence. So you have humans in the loop that aren't necessarily at the point of care. That's something that's fundamentally different from anything that we had in centralized approaches in the past decades.
Mm-hmm. And what you're hitting on there, Todd, a little bit is that connectivity between different members of the healthcare ecosystem. And there's a couple questions here I'm going to put together and throw it your way, Matt. It's around, Chris asks, what are the barriers to real-time data sharing and how can they be overcome? And then Brianna asks, how does improved data integration translate to better patient outcomes? So let's kind of put that together. And Matt, if you want to talk a little bit about, hey, how do we accelerate or improve real-time data sharing across the healthcare ecosystem? And then what are some of the benefits to patient outcomes of doing so?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of, I'll call them legacy barriers to data sharing. Some of it was lack of standards around different data types, which we're starting to see new adoption of things like FHIR data being able to be more universally used. I think some of it is very well intentioned and needs to be in place with security and PHI data. There's also kind of some, we have perverse incentives in some of the ecosystems that kind of generate a lack of trust that I think when people get into the room and have the conversations around centered on the patient outcome, everyone finds that they're all along the same lines. They're all trying to drive the same outcome, which is patient outcome. So I think a lot of it is just, one, the understanding of the impact that this data can have on everybody's shared mission, which is improving health outcomes. Mm-hmm. Getting those people together and then facilitating the actual movement of data in a secure manner, leveraging standards, and then being able to make sure that as you're pulling that data together, that you're doing that closed loop so everyone can see what that impact is going forward. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of what I'm seeing as conversations happening amongst the different parts of the ecosystem, but it's really focused on a health outcome for patients, as opposed to maybe a specific capability or a specific function within a provider or a payer. It really is centered around the patient outcome.
Yeah, and just to build on that, we've got, and I think even Rachel asked a question too around how can you accelerate data sharing. At Inovalon, there's a couple of things we're doing. We have some technologies. One is a real-time based API solution that allows a healthcare provider to pull in real time someone's medical history that may be outside of their immediate purview in their EHR. So maybe a patient went and had an emergency visit while they were on vacation. That information can be super relevant. So being able to pull that in real time using an API, I think is pretty powerful. In addition, as payers run analytics on their membership and identify where there might be some quality gaps that need to be filled, or perhaps some risk gaps that need to be filled, being able to deliver that through that real-time API to that provider when they're in front of that patient is super powerful in improving efficiencies, getting the maximum benefit or value out of that encounter. At the end of the day, that's improving economics, improving outcomes. So those are a couple of things that we're seeing and doing to help contribute, is taking the results of analytics that the payers do and bringing that to that provider at that moment of care, we think is a really important part of this journey. So Todd, we've been here for, I think, over 20 minutes now talking about data and AI. We haven't really got into generative AI yet. So let's, I'm going to tee this one up for you. How should members of the healthcare ecosystem think about the use of generative AI in the context of improving patient outcomes and economics? And let me start with you on how they should think about it. What are some of the fundamentals there? And what are some of the key use cases that you're seeing in the market today?
Well, thanks, Eron. One of the things that I think is important goes back to the first comment we had just on data in general, and that is security and compliance, right? If you don't have a basis in robust data that is securely represented, then people can't trust what may come on top of that, whether that's a customer service process or that's a clinical workflow process or a revenue cycle optimization. So generative AI considerations take that a little bit further even, because you have these things out there like model hallucination. You need risk mitigation strategies. Mm-hmm. You need clear human oversight protocols for clinical applications where they're going to be rendering opinions at the point of care. Prompt engineering, discipline, and version control to make sure that you're getting consistent responses over time and that those responses are generally repeatable without bias. If you look at 80% of our clinical research data over the past several decades has been generated based upon a Western European genomic model. So when you're talking about pharmaceutical, life sciences, payer, provider, all working together, they each need a lens on that through the social determinants of health to make sure that you're actually customizing and tailoring for the individual and their background. And that requires explainability requirements by use case to make sure that there's continuous performance monitoring against any kind of drift.
Yeah. Hey, Matt, what about you? What kind of generative AI use cases are you seeing right now in healthcare that can improve outcomes and economics? Christina was asking about use cases in administrative workflows and clinical documentation, but what are some of the others that you're seeing?
Yeah, some of the ones that I've seen that really have the potential to raise the quality of care, things around imaging, medical imaging, pathology. Right now, those are very manual, both of those things, and they require pathologists and radiologists to actually look at those documents and understand what they're seeing. And that translation between what I'm seeing and what my diagnostic is, that's essentially training a model. And so we're seeing a lot of companies that are taking that human process of here's what I'm looking at, here's what I'm identifying, and being able to say, here's what that means, training kind of foundational scientific and medical models so that they can build that into the process for a couple of things. One, prioritizing what should be looked at first. So in pathology, if you get 10 slides that you need to review, you're going to start at the top and go to the bottom. Well, if that 10th one is the one that's most critical, being able to start with something that evaluates it and prioritizes it and brings it to the top of the loop, that has a dramatic impact on the quality of care. The other dynamic is if somebody is looking at an image for a specific thing, it's just human nature that they're looking for that specific thing. Yet there may be something that is not specifically being looked at that generative AI can find, highlight, and draw attention to it so that human in the loop can go and say, oh, I wasn't looking for this, but wow, look what I found, and I found it early. And so I think those are some of the things that we're seeing with, especially some of the image-based generative AI that has the potential to drive improved quality of care across the board.
Great, Matt. Thank you for that. I know we're coming up on time. So, go ahead, Todd. You want to jump in? One more thing?
I was just going to add, that's a great model on imaging because it leads you to the next thing of integration of multimodal data. You take that imaging, genomics, and social determinants of health data, you can develop more comprehensive care models, and you're making the health system healthier because you've made that diagnosis out of 100 images a radiologist needs to look at. If they're told in the beginning of the day, look at these 12 that look super critical or interesting, they get released into those high value assets and specialties next, which improves the health of the system economically as well.
Got it. Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. There's so many different use cases, but it's so important to keep human in the loop. And so generative AI should provide recommendations or suggestions or help synthesize vast amounts of data. But at the end of the day, we want that trained clinician to be on point for our care. So just to wrap us up, Brianna had a great question. What makes the Inovalon and AWS partnership unique in the healthcare space? And let me start with you, Todd, in the minute or so we have left, and then go to you, Matt.
Well, the partnership we've had over the last 5 years, I think it really enables both organizations to learn and be curious, one of our leadership principles. And through that, we've been able to scale, transform, and innovate more quickly together for the benefit of your customers and the benefit of the ecosystem. It's important to bring not only large scale, but it's important to bring depth of focus. And working with Inovalon, you've really helped your customers do that by connecting with what we bring, but also more importantly, what they can bring to your solution sets.
Great. How about you, Matt?
I mean, I really think it boils down to the word partnership. Inovalon never came to us and said, hey, I need X, can you give me X? You guys came to us and said, here's what we're trying to accomplish. How should we do that together? And by doing that, it opened up the aperture of what we could do together. If you come to me with X, I can either have X or not have it. But if you come to me with an open-ended problem, we can look at creative ways of solving it. We can bring in maybe not just AWS, but something from Amazon more broadly. And so I think that was really critical for our partnership, to start with what you were trying to accomplish, not necessarily how you're trying to accomplish it, and we could iterate and solution together.
Yeah, I would agree. The way I think about it is, you start with the patient, how are we improving the outcomes for the patient, and then work backwards from there. And then the technology can connect the dots. The subject matter expertise from Inovalon, the technology chops from AWS comes together to create solutions that ultimately improve patient outcomes and economics for healthcare. Well, gentlemen, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Todd. Appreciate your time here on this LinkedIn Live webcast. And thank you, everyone, for your questions and attending. We look forward to seeing you in the future. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.